Welcome to Leominster Access Television, and welcome to Leominster, a present to the future. I am here today to conduct another interview in a series of interviews focusing on the neighborhood signs which you probably have noticed around the city and which have created such interest and conversation. The purpose of the neighborhood signs, as envisioned by Mayor Dean Mazzarella, is a positive one: to encourage a feeling of neighborhood identity, a greater sense of community in the city of Leominster. The goal, the purpose of this series of interviews is to produce a permanent historical record, both in words and pictures, of Leominster as it exists today, in the present, with some reflections on the past. Using the neighborhood signs as focal points, we hope to create a snapshot, so to speak, of Leominster today, which will be available to Leominsterites of the future, 50, 100, 200 years, and even beyond, of Leominster's neighborhoods. Leominster, a present to the future, a gift to the future. Today we are very fortunate to have three knowledgeable guests, three gentlemen who can tell us lots about the number 6 Schoolhouse neighborhood. This is the area, this is the building itself that we're talking about, number 6. This is as it looked in 1944. And our guests today are Mr. Don Pimarini, Mr. John Chury, who may be referred to as Joe by his contemporaries, and Mr. Jack Woodsmall. Would each of you gentlemen briefly identify yourself and your connection to number 6, the Little Red Schoolhouse, as it has come to be called? Don, I know you didn't attend number 6, but I know you were up there for a long, long time. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Bob. Yes, I visited quite frequently. I spent a lot of time up there as a working hand in my young days. I live at 215 West Street, Leominster. I'm the chairman of the Historical Commission, so I'm involved in this process of putting together neighborhood history. And number 6, community area, has quite a unique background for the city of Leominster. It had some outstanding people that lived there, and they played a major role in the history of Leominster. And during the course of this talk, maybe I'll bring in some of the background of some of the individuals.
Excellent.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Don. John, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm John Chury. I live at 27 Grant Street, Leominster, and I went to school at Fallbrook at number 6 Schoolhouse. And at that time, it was all agricultural community. Well, 9/10 of it was. And we always felt proud because we were all in the same boat, so to speak. And nobody was trying to impress anybody, and, well, we were all the same, I want to say. And it was quite an experience. And I took a lot of kidding about going to number 6, a one-room schoolhouse and one teacher with 5 grades. And a lot of times as I got older in junior high school and high school, they would say to me, "Did you see any Indians on your way to school this morning?" And is that part of Leominster, or is that Sterling, or is that Princeton? So I took a lot of ribbon, but I'm proud of it. Hey, you've got to go to school someplace, and at the time that was the best place to go. And so, like I said, I was very proud.
And I can see why it was a fine school. Just before we introduce Jack, you mentioned Fallbrook, and there is a Fallbrook school today in the neighborhood. And why, I'm going to ask you this now, and I know the answer, why did you refer to, you said you went to Fallbrook?
Well, we used to play a lot at Fallbrook. We would fish, and we would chase suckers, you know, the big fish in the springtime. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The falls of Fallbrook, the Cascades,
And,
a stone's throw from the school itself.
Right.
Oh, yes.
It was, you might say, from my house to Fallbrook, it was almost like a road,
Right.
in a sense.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. And Jack, could you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, Jack Woodsmall, John Woodsmall, everybody calls me Jack. Why, I don't know. I grew up in the neighborhood. I grew up born and raised at Shoalin Farms.
way up at the end of Pleasant Street. My father always said I was probably born under an apple tree. But I went to school there. I can't remember the year, but I think it must have been 34 or 33, something like that. I left there in 38 after 5 years there. And we had a lot of fun there. And I will say one thing. I went from there to Bennett School. And when I went to Bennett School, I was so far ahead of the 6th grade class that
That's true.
it just wasn't funny. I knew things that they never even heard of. But we had, as Joe said, we had a lot of fun, a lot of different people, and but we all played together, went to school together, and I guess that's just about it.
Sounds
Excuse me a minute, but I kept thinking when he said his father thought he was born under an apple tree, I said, well, maybe he wasn't born under an apple tree, but his father thought his mother was the apple of his eye.
All right, Joe. That's a good one.
Good for you,
I like
Joe.
that. Yeah, I like that.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
And John and Don. I'm going to ask Don a question for the audience. Where exactly, what constitutes or comprises the number 6 neighborhood? I mean, what are the bounds, the general bounds?
What I did, Bob, was I looked over a map and kind of figured out where the kids came from at number 6, and I knew that Joe Chury lived on Grant Street, and that's about a mile away. And then on Wachusett Street, there really weren't people that lived way up on the top of Wachusett Street. A few
Peterson
Peterson
Street.
Peterson.
I don't know the family up there though.
Yes.
And the Petersons lived
Oh, the
on.
Petersons.
That's why the
Petersons
street
lived-
was named
Oh,
Peterson
okay.
Street. Was
Okay.
And they went to school. There was a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ruthie
oh,
and
that's that
Francis.
Peterson
Yeah.
that you knew. They came from Peterson.
That's
Well,
right across from the present golf course.
Okay. Well, I think I went as far as Peterson Street, and I went as far as Grant Street, and then I went to the Sterling Line, which included the Wood Smalls, and of course the Washmans, but none of the Washmans went to number 6.
No.
And then I went down as far as the Wass Farm, but I didn't go beyond that point. So it's quite an area. I would say it's a mile. It would be a mile to the Sterling Line,
Yeah.
and then almost a mile to the Peterson Street,
Yeah.
and then a mile to your house.
Sure.
I don't think there were any families in the Rogers family down below you.
No.
So that's the area I encompassed. And in that area, there weren't too many families. But it was extensive.
Today, there are loads
Oh,
of
well,
houses.
it's entirely
But
different today.
Altogether
in
different.
those days, it was really rural.
All
Oh,
rural.
yes.
Rural, really rural. And I know that today, the Historical Commission, in fact, has placed a marker, a granite marker, which says it's 2 miles, the schoolhouse itself is 2 miles from the center.
Yep.
Yes,
So that exists
Yeah.
today, so.
yes.
The present building, the little, very well-kept little red schoolhouse, that isn't the original building though, is it?
No,
No,
it
it
is
was-
not.
No.
Two
No.
before that.
2 before that, and I have this book, which you gentlemen also have. This is a commemorative book. I think the publication date was 1987, and it's called The Number 6 Little Red Schoolhouse, Leominster, Massachusetts, and it's dedicated to the memory of Irma Whitney, who was a longtime resident of the area and very prominent in the neighborhood and in the Number 6 Community Center.
Yeah.
Very fine lady. And it says on page 14, 1767, the first school was built on this site. And in 1792, the school was replaced by a larger building. And in 1851, the present school, which exists now, was built on this site. And I remember reading this, and John mentioned this to me. I think the two original buildings may have been closer to the road at that time, but maybe, we don't know exactly whether the road changed a little bit or, but it's a very, very well-kept building, and we're going to get into that a little bit more later on.
Could I interrupt you for
Sure.
a second? Years ago, of course, they didn't have any snow plows or any modern equipment for snow removal. And a lot of the houses and barns and schools were built close to the road because they had to shovel that by hand.
Makes a lot of sense.
So if you notice, a lot of the old places, the closer they could build them to the road, that would mean less shoveling
shoveling.
to do. Today, that's not true.
Right.
It's very obvious to me because you figure Whitney's home up the road from number 6,
Right.
that barn was right close to the road. And you remember Hardy's
Oh, yeah,
barn?
right on the
It
road.
was
Right
practically on
Right.
the road.
Definitely.
And then the barn across from the farm where you lived,
Yeah.
Jack,
Close-
that was
close to the
what,
road.
20 feet from the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you brought a
That was-
very valuable point out there, Joe.
Yeah.
And
Never
not
thought
only
of that.
that, if you go back a little further, probably most of the traffic was horses and buggies.
Mm-hmm.
So, why would you build it far away from the road? In other words, there's no noise, there's no.
No,
Today, you want it back a little bit more.
yeah,
because-
for a little privacy, but,
Right.
but back then, you had all the privacy you wanted.
Well, today, they go by 50 miles an hour, so.
In fact, Wasser's barn, the one that just recently disassembled
Right.
and brought some other place,
Yeah.
that was close to the road too.
Yeah.
Well, that was in my reasoning, that was one of the reasons, the snow removal.
Yeah.
Was a big problem,
Yeah.
where today it's not that big of a problem.
So they were very, very practical then.
Right, they had to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Necessity.
That's a good point when you say practical, and if I may, I'd like to bring a lot of these things up that I think of is
Sure.
that a lot of the barns were built with windows on the south side. And when a few years back, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, when they started talking about solar energy, I said solar energy was nothing new. The farmers did that years and years ago, generations ago. They depended on the sun.
Yep.
And I even tell my wife to park the car so the sun comes through the windshield and it's nice and warm in the car in the wintertime.
That's right.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times I look at like a pine tree near a road that shades the road, and there's ice on the road. The whole road is dry except with the shade of that pine. I said, why don't they cut that tree down and put a maple? I don't want to cut a tree down, but if you replace a spruce tree or a fir tree or a pine tree with let's say a maple, you won't have any ice on the road. No sanding, no salt, no overtime.
That's right.
Okay, forgive me for
No,
interrupting.
Makes a lot of practical sense.
And
Well, they had to be practical to make a
That's
living.
right. They had to get and the same with a lot of houses, that there was very few windows in the north side of the house.
Right.
A lot of windows on the south side.
Right, yes.
They harnessed the
Dramatic.
sun.
Right. They
Is
oriented
that a
the
good
house.
way to
That's
put
right,
it?
yeah.
They had to. That was the only way they could survive.
Yeah,
It
because
was never enough, but
No.
today we don't do that. We waste everything.
We're less energy efficient, that's for sure. Before we proceed any further, number 6, I'm going to direct this question to Don. Don, number 6 Schoolhouse, does that mean there was a number 4, a number 3, a number 7, a number 8? What's the story on that?
There are actually close to 20 different one-room schoolhouses in town for about 200 years. And there are still 4 of them standing today. Of course, the one that everyone knows about is number 6. Now, there is one, if you're interested,
Yes.
gentlemen,
Yeah.
there is one that's Cumberland Farms, and it's in North Leominster at the intersection of Day and Main Street.
Yes.
Now, it's a brick one, and that's still standing. I think that's the only brick one that's standing, other than Field School, but Field School was not a one-room schoolhouse, not like number 6. The other one is on the intersection of Pleasant and Franklin Street, and that's still there, and that's a private home. And the next one is at the intersection of Maple Avenue and West Street, and that's a private home, and that's still standing. some of the unique ones that perhaps you gentlemen don't know about, there was one at Bartlett's Pond
Didn't know that.
on Elm Street. I think it's down today, but just recently it came down. And the other one that was kind of unique was the one in No Town. I think that was number 9, was up in No Town. And we know where that site is. Bob has researched that, and he knows exact site. And it was on the Stearns property, I think, in No Town.
Pretty close to
Yeah.
where we found some of the, we think we found some of the foundation.
Foundation.
So these one-room schoolhouses were rather common in town until, of course, we started building the big ones. And the first one, of course, was Field School.
Well, they more or less had to be because there was no transportation. I mean, you had a neighborhood, and they all walked to school.
Right, no
No.
buses, no.
No buses or anything else.
Right.
So,
Well, then how did you get to Bennett?
how did I get to Bennett? They used to come up. There used to be a bus that came up as far as the schoolhouse, number 6.
Oh, you did have a bus.
From
In
there.
39.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Public transportation.
yeah. Well, a bus, they had cars, they had pretty near anything. Yeah.
Don, on the Cumberland Farm area of Day Street and Main Street, now that current building, that store, that's not the original,
Oh, yes.
that is.
Oh, they've
that's
done
the
a lot
site,
of
but-
changes
oh,
to
they-
it.
Oh, I didn't realize.
There are a lot of changes, but that was the original. I don't remember the number, but they all had numbers because they tied in with districts.
Yeah.
Before the wards were devised, they were referred to as school districts.
Yeah.
And that's why it was called number 6,
Yeah.
school
Yeah,
district.
Yeah,
Lately, that was better known as Fitzgerald's Fruit Stand.
Yeah, well, oh, it hasn't been in use for a long time.
No, but
you
I mean,
realize.
for the current people
Yes.
would remember it as Fitzgerald's Fruit Stand.
Yes.
He used to press cider there, make apple cider, and he was, Elmer Fitzgerald was quite known in that area.
yeah.
Gentlemen, what was it like attending a one-room schoolhouse? My experience has always been in
Yeah.
the graded,
Well-
the graded system and with classmates and so on.
I don't know. I'll put it this way, because when I went to school, that was where I went to school. So nothing was new or nothing was old to me when I went there. But it was unique, I think, the way it was organized, because the teacher was the boss, and we all had our little chores to do. And I mean, from wiping the blackboards to putting the flag up in the morning,
Bringing in wood,
bringing in wood.
that was a big chore.
That was a big chore, because we had a big old, what was it? Did it take a 4-foot piece of wood? I thought
Yes,
so.
yeah.
4 feet long. And I don't know if that stove is still there or not.
It was the last I knew.
Yeah.
It still
And
is.
the stovepipe the stove was at the front of the school. The pipe went up and it went all across the ceiling to the chimney way in the back. And of course,
that gave off more
you
heat.
got heat all the way
It was wired to the tin
wired
Right.
to the
Tin
ceiling.
ceiling.
There was a tin ceiling up there, if I remember right. Because
Right.
one of the fellows put his foot through it one time. He shouldn't have been up there.
It was plaster and the kid fell through it.
Yeah, yeah,
Then they
you remember
replaced it with
that?
tin.
Yeah.
I don't really remember it, but I read it.
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember who he was, but
I remember reading in this commemorative book that sometimes the long stovepipe would separate,
Right. Fall apart.
fall apart, and then a local farmer or someone would have to,
Come
an
and
adult
fix
would
it.
have to
Come
come
and
in.
fix But speaking of that, and I think one of those pictures shows it, just before it went into the chimney, there was a chain that hung down, double chain, and there was a damper up there and that thing, so you could open it or close the damper
Without climbing up to
without
reach it,
climbing
in other
way up
words.
there.
It was a handy.
And it was an awful nice thing that every once in a while that somebody decided we ought to have a recess.
I know it's coming.
They'd sneak up and close that damper. And of course, this room would fill with smoke and everything else, and we all had to go outside
Guilty, Your Honor.
for a recess. Now, I'm sure that the teacher knew what was going on, but she probably wanted a recess too. So.
I'd like to bring up another point, if I may, but I have had a lot of respect for that teacher, Elsie Powers
Yeah.
Fisher. She was more than a teacher. She was very good to us. My parents both came from Italy, and she was very helpful in more ways than just being a teacher. And I always remembered that, and I'd like to thank her for it.
And this book points that out, that she was much loved and was a great
Oh,
woman.
yeah,
She would go out of her
Yeah.
way.
yeah. And I,
You know.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing about that little room, that one-room schoolhouse. I think the last year I was there, I think there were 15 people,
And
Children.
Children in the class.
and that was from the 1st to the 5th grade. But if somebody was getting a little behind, she would take the time to
Definitely.
give the rest of them something to do, and then take the time and spend with that person, and get them up to where they should be, and then everything would go along as,
Give that child
Truly
That's
a
right.
good
the
teacher.
individual
Yes.
attention that that child
That's
needed
right.
at that time.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Did Elsie live down the street from Moss Farm on the left-hand side?
Someplace down there, yes.
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 I don't remember exactly where.
Yes.
Further
She
down.
lived right there on Pleasant Street.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, you realize that she eventually taught at Bennett School.
Yes.
4th grade.
Yeah, after that.
Yes, when the school closed, she eventually went to Bennett School. And she only, the kids were city kids, and they were not country kids. And they drove her nuts because she was such a charming woman.
Yeah,
That's true. I can
She-
see that.
yeah,
And she tried to
Understand.
deal with the kids as she would at number 6, and they made her life miserable. I understand she only lasted 6 months. As a
now
teacher, she did come
Oh, I
back the
thought it
following
was-
year.
Yeah.
She did come back, but the kids did give her a very difficult time.
There must have been a period of adjustment from
Yes, from number 6 to
a
Bennett.
rural school,
Yeah.
almost
Right.
like a family,
yeah,
to
Yeah.
a city school, even though Leominster was a town,
The
or a
reason-
city or town.
The reason I know that, we had a teacher, Mrs. Burns, do you remember her? She was the principal.
Principal of Bennett.
And Mrs. Crossett,
yeah.
Yeah.
she was the 6th grade
She
teacher.
was my teacher.
Well, Mrs. Crossett used to come across this, where she used to teach, and come across the hall and kind of straighten out the kids that were giving Elsie trouble. And when Miss Crossett came in, you could hear a pin drop.
Sergeant.
But then when Mrs. Burns came in, she picked the kids up by the ears and brought them downstairs. You remember? She was the principal.
Oh, yeah.
Can I tell a joke? No, it's appropriate in the sense that when we talked about friendly and all that, and the country boys and the city boys and that, I went to a restaurant in Worcester, and I had ziti, and the hostess came over, and she says, "Well, how do you like the ziti?" And I says, "Hey, I'm a country boy. I don't know anything about the ziti."
That's all right.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Now, you gentlemen, now John, I know, was in the last, or Jack, were you in the last class?
No,
next to the last.
Next to
Next
the
to
last
the
class,
last.
which was in 1939 was
The last.
the last class.
Yeah,
Jack, you left in 38
38, yeah.
and went to
Bennett.
Bennett. So had you moved in time?
Moved?
No, he was a one grade ahead of me.
One grade, okay,
One
okay.
grade
So,
ahead.
So it came out the
John-
same.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you were still, but then you went from number 6 to Bennett,
To
and then
Bennett.
John
Stayed another year.
Stayed another year, and then
I
you
went
went
to-
from number 6
to Bennett.
So that was
I-
the
I
number
like-
6 fed Bennett.
I like to tell everybody that I was so smart. They asked me to leave and they closed up the school when I left.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You mentioned recess, and now what would you kids do at recess time? In the different seasons, I know it would depend. But
We could go sliding in the winter,
Yeah.
more at noon, I think,
Yeah,
than at recess.
Yeah, it was a little longer recess.
Yeah, and I remember playing horseshoes. I remember a girl, Eleanor Campbell, walked right across the path of a metal horseshoe and got a great big gash on her head.
Yeah.
And there were games.
We used to play
Hide and
duck on
seek.
the rock.
Yeah,
Duck on the rock. We had some big rocks there. We'd put a smaller one on, and then we'd all stand there and throw stones and knock that one out.
wow,
there was hide and
do that. We
seek.
can't do that today.
Yeah.
Hide and seek.
Oh, yeah.
We
Didn't,
used to-
didn't you play in his falls?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was our class trip
The,
That was a class trip,
to
yeah.
go to the falls.
The falls of
And,
Fall Brook. I happen to own both the land on which the falls are located, and that was again was a stone's throw from the school itself.
Right.
And the kids, the teacher would take the children, the kids over
Well,
there. for-
we were charmed. You know, that today it seems, like I said, they go to Disney World, they go all over the world today on a class trip, but we were charmed to go to the falls.
Yeah. Going to fall.
I saw my first hummingbird. They would point out flowers on different trips and different birds on
Yeah.
different trips. And, you know, like I said, it was fun and educational.
Educate a lot of appreciation of nature and nature
Yeah.
study
And
and
during-
science. That's science.
During the winter, there was all kinds, the teacher would have all kinds of bird feeders all outside, and you could sit there and watch all the different, and she'd name all the different birds for you. And,
I think it was nice. I'm a rural person, and I you know, I liked it, I guess.
It shows. I can tell by this conversation.
Yes, but I've got to ask them, did they use the outhouse?
sure.
Well, we thought nothing of it.
No.
When I tell my granddaughter that we had an outhouse,
Yeah.
she gets hysterical. She said, "Where was the TV?" I said, "We didn't have any TV." And but we thought nothing of it. Everybody had an outhouse, so why would you feel out of place?
Yeah.
There was no city sewerage.
No.
No,
It didn't.
no.
It didn't at that point in time.
No.
Other sections.
There was
maybe
no
had,
water.
right?
We had a well
A
for
well,
water.
no city
hot
water,
water,
no
just
hot water.
just a cold water faucet on the little sink. And that was it.
So
And the outhouse was attached to the school building?
They
Yeah,
were
it's on the back
The
side.
back corner, the back left-hand corner as you
When
face the
you're
building.
in with a group of people and we're all in the same boat, you don't think anything of it.
We
You know, like
most of us, I can remember, I don't know whether it was when I was in school, but I remember that we had an outhouse at the farm.
we did too.
Yeah.
Everybody did.
Everybody did, I think. And I know Hardee's did.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't have running water. They had a well.
Yeah.
That was the topic of the conversation in July and August. Well, how's your well? Is your
Yeah.
well gone dry yet?
yeah.
Yeah, go easy on the water. Don't
Right.
use too much.
Well, that's still a topic of conversation even today. We
Yeah.
have to consider
That's
the
right.
water, but
Should you say something about the teacher's pay? Because when I read that in the paper, in that little booklet, I was amazed at how little the pay was. But at that
Yeah.
time, it was, it made sense.
Yeah.
Is that the right way to put it?
Yeah.
yes, the pay was minimal.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like
very, very.
$28 a month or something?
Well, depending on
Well,
the time.
I would say it would tie in with what your parents made for a living, too.
Well, yeah, the
For
times.
instance, what was your dad getting for a 40-pound weight of milk? There probably wasn't
Not
much.
much.
No, everything was.
Not much, no.
How was that delivered to Newton's, by the way? Did you bring it down?
No, we delivered it house to house.
Yeah,
Oh,
used to have a
you had
milk-
your own
had-
dairy.
You had your own
Oh,
milk.
Oh,
room.
that's right, Joe, I forgot.
There were
that.
20 or 30 small farms all around Leominster, and everybody was selling milk.
So
At
you
first
didn't
it was-
process it at Newton's then?
First, it was raw milk, and then in 1941, there was a law passed
Yeah, you had to
where all
pasteurize it.
milk had to be pasteurized, and my dad put it in a pasteurizer.
Yeah,
So we produced it, bottled it, and delivered it.
yeah.
But every year, everything we bought went up, and everything we sold went down.
Yeah.
So you get caught in that squeeze like the little small store.
Yeah.
So
But Jack,
everybody sold out.
You didn't have a process planner.
No, no, no. The
Well,
only,
they were mostly apples, I
yeah,
would say.
the only thing, we had 3 cows,
Oh.
three or 4 cows, just for
Home,
our family and the Washburns.
Okay.
That was it.
that was common.
But the other guys, all the other farmers, they either delivered it to Newton or Newton picked it up, or
Right.
Fry's.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right,
I know Henry Tuttle used to bring his milk down to Newton's,
yeah.
because once in a while we'd hook a ride with him on a Saturday
Yeah.
or something like
And
that.
I
the
remember
same,
one
and
of the
same with
farmers-
Wass and
One of the
and
farmers
Hardy.
brought their milk to Valley's Dairy on French Hill.
Yes.
One of the, we mentioned the chores and so on and things you did at the school. What were some of the things that your teacher taught you or had you do around the one-room schoolhouse that gave you a sense of responsibility? Did you have, who cleaned the school? Was there a janitor? Was there a,
No,
who swept up and
I think they did have somebody
Did they?
come in, but we did.
we didn't.
the day-to-day things?
Yeah, day to day, I can remember
Responsibilities.
we'd tail end, we'd sweep the floors
You would,
and
kids would sweep the floors,
everything else. And,
wash the board.
yeah, yeah. And,
We'd bring in wood.
yeah,
It was the wood stove, of course, and
had a
it seemed
big-
like everybody helped.
You mentioned the wood stove, John, so that the heating then, during all the course of the time that you were there, was heated by a wood stove.
That's
Definitely.
Electricity, while you were there, did you have electricity?
Oh, yes.
You had
Yeah.
electricity. What about a telephone? Was there?
No,
No.
So communication between the school
No.
and
No.
you had to physically
Yeah.
go to the center of town, or?
well, lots of times Elsie Fisher would go up to Gurdon Powers and use the phone in an emergency or
So that-
something like
Or
that.
she would send up a kid.
Or
something.
send a kid up,
Yeah.
something like
Now, is
that.
that the Powers farm at the top of the hill?
Yeah.
Up Wachusett
Right
Street on
next
the left
door,
first,
more or
right
less.
next door.
Yeah.
So it really sounds like it was it was isolated, but that was a good thing.
Yeah,
I mean, it was an enjoyable thing, because it was almost like a little world in itself, and all the whatever hustle and bustle there was there of the town itself, you avoided that.
yeah. I don't think we ever felt isolated.
No,
We had our own things to do and
I remember getting my first kiss.
wow.
Well, you brought up a valid point there, Bob. I think it was a close-knit group and everybody knew one
Close-knit
another.
is the-
For instance, all these names that I've mentioned to Joe and Jack, they knew all these people. They knew all the people on Wachusett Street and Union Street and Pleasant Street, at least that end of town.
Yeah.
And because they all went to the same school. I'm sure the parents got together too.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
For instance, there was the Hardy family. There was what, the 2 boys and a
a girl.
girl in
And
the
a girl,
Hardy family.
yeah.
And there was the Boyden family. There was a couple of boys and
Right.
a
Yeah.
couple of girls.
Couple of girls and a boy, yeah.
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 And of course, Tuttle, Archie didn't have children.
No,
Henry was the father, though. He lived on Pleasant Street.
Right.
Henry lived on Pleasant Street,
Yes.
yeah.
I think,
The
excuse me,
Marcos had some children.
they came later.
They
I
were
think.
later, yeah.
But I think even the parents would help each other.
Oh, sure.
You know, if you needed help, they would come and help. They never asked for pay. They never stopped and said, well, you owe me $5.
No.
They would,
No.
we were all helping each other, which I look at it as a good thing.
Yeah, you don't
We
find-
still do that today,
Yeah,
but not very many people do.
no, not too many people do it, but,
It's, when I said isolated, I didn't mean that in a negative way, I meant it in a positive way.
Yeah,
It was,
right.
you were sort of
Oh, I understand.
insulated.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
And
Yeah.
that led to almost a real sense of community and almost family and closeness, close-knit,
Yes,
as Don
yes.
said. And I think some of that exists with some of the people in that area today,
Oh,
some
I
of the
think
older
so,
people.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there is a very active number 6 community center, which brings us sort of to near the end of this interview, I noticed that Jack was he left there in 1938. John, you were a member of the last class in 1939, and then in the commemorative book it says, in March, and I'm quoting, in March of 1949, 10 years after the last class left the number 6 schoolhouse, a self-appointed committee of neighbors met with the hope of uniting the group into an organization. Their purpose was to preserve the school as a community center, end quote. So 1939, last class, and then 10 years later in March of 49, there was a gap of 10 years where the building pretty much, there was no more school there.
No.
And then the neighborhood got together and they wanted to preserve the building and that feeling. And then to continue the quote, Lloyd Hardy of Pleasant Street called the meeting together and was elected moderator. This was in March of 1949. It was then voted by the neighborhood group to create an organization and be known as the Number 6 Community Center. And there were various committees set up. And that organization, that sense of community, exists today, even today. And the building is maintained and still used by the organization up there. And there is an association today. I know that various community events can be held there. And, it's very, very well kept building. Very, very well.
I was a charter member of that. I remember.
Jack, you were a charter
when they started.
I remember that the school was used, well, I almost want to say like a town hall, but I remember they had agricultural meetings and different other meetings at that school. That would be something that should be mentioned, I would think.
They had.
I mean, while it was still a school.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
They'd
the
have
community
something
was
going on in
using
the
it.
evening,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I remember attending some meetings
Yeah,
there.
yeah. They had I can remember they had a 4-H meeting there at one time. Somebody from Worcester or something came and spoke to all the.
It was a place to meet, in a
Yeah.
sense.
Sure.
Would that be right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it still is today, and I think John Bulger, a local resident, is active in the association today, and I know that they would like membership. I think anyone, you don't have to live in the neighborhood, I believe, anymore to be a member of that.
No, there's a lot of them that don't live in the neighborhood, but they had maybe a cousin or a grandfather or something that was fairly near or something, and they have joined. I know I've gone to a few meetings there.
So it sounds as though bringing this interesting, I think, interview session to an end, that there must have been something very, very special about the number 6 school and the number 6 neighborhood, because even today it's almost like a magnet for people who have a connection there. They really still want to be associated with it and love it.
Bob, is there any chance I could get a few words in for the history of the area?
Absolutely, absolutely.
The history of Leominster is actually centered around number 6, because the first resident was Gershom Houghton, and he lived right there at the Boyden farm.
Yeah, right behind it. The
yes.
marker is there.
The marker is there. It's on the intersection of Hill Street
Yep.
and Pleasant Street.
Yep.
And just down the road from that area, then in Gershom Houghton, was a fellow by the name of Wilder. And part of the Wilder family is David Wilder, who wrote the history of Leominster, and the last history was written in 1853.
Wow.
And Wilder is a name in your section. In fact, that brook next to number 6 is called the Wilder Brook. And now the other name that I should mention is the Bus family.
Yeah.
All the houses on that hill that you lived in, the Washman Farm area, were run by the Bus family. Now the Bus family, they occupied the Hardy home, the Whitney home, Bob Reagan's home, the home that you lived in at once upon a time. That could have been a Bus too. And then Paul C. Washman's mother, that house, the present owners, No, across the street, it would be Bedard or Bernard's. Well, that
That's
was a-
one of the older houses.
Yeah, that's a bus family also. Well, the reason I'm mentioning the bus family is that they participated in our American Revolution.
Wow.
And we have in our commission office a photocopy of his diary that he
Oh,
used
wow.
during the American Revolution.
Wow.
And it's very interesting.
Yeah.
He talks all about living at the number 6 school area. But he doesn't mention number 6, but
No.
Well,
because it was, I think well, he may have, I'm not positive about that. But you do have some very interesting people that lived in that area.
Oh, yeah.
No.
It's
And
a-
thank
Plus the 2 of them.
Yes, yeah. And Don, thank you very much for mentioning
Yeah.
that, and it's about Samuel Buss and the diary and all the other things, but the Gershom Houghton site, that was the first
Home in Leominster
First
was
home in
built
Leominster.
there.
was
In
built
fact, the
very
well
close.
cover is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed it? It's right up against the marker.
Yep.
And that well, they just found it, say, in the last 10, 15 years, and they put it next to the marker. There's a home there now.
Well, that road.
it's quite a ways away, but
Yes,
That little cart path originally was the road that went by there.
yes,
It went from Hill Street to, I guess it
Pleasant
came
Street.
on to Pleasant Street.
yes.
That, it's quite interesting.
I remember, if I may, in the wintertime, we'd go sliding in the field, that big field, and
which now has houses.
right, and there was a barbed wire fence at the bottom by Wilder Brook.
Yeah.
You know, parallel with Pleasant Street.
I remember
and
that.
I remember, I don't know who it was, but they were going down on a sled, laying down on a sled, and there was a girl behind him, the one on a sled, laying down. And she kept saying, I wonder if we're past the fence yet, because they would go under the fence. And she sat up to see if she was past it, and she got the barbed wire right
Oh,
across
right
her head,
across
like
there.
that.
Yeah.
So it did have, we did have a few
Oh, yeah.
accidents, if you
And,
want to put it that
I
way.
remember Francis Peterson, Butch Peterson, climbed a flagpole one time. Do you remember that?
Get caught his ribs.
And when he slid down, where you used to tie the rope, caught his ribs right there, and 3 or 4 of us had to pick him up off of it. I guess it never hurt him too bad.
He must take a lot of ribbon on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of ribbon.
I guess.
Sorry.
That's all right, that's pretty good. All right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you, Don, John, and Jack, for sharing your memories of the number 6 Schoolhouse neighborhood with our Leominster audience of today, and for helping create this historical record for Leominsterites of the future. To conclude today's session, thanks as always to the folks at Leominster Access TV, Kyle Pomerini, Jack Sully, and the technicians in the back, whose expertise and facilities, beautiful, excellent state-of-the-art facilities, I might say, helped make this historical helped to make this historical record possible. Thank you.
Thank you,
Very
Bob.
good. Thank you,
Thank
Bob.
you.